influence the world. Everywhere you go, how you behave, how you act, how you conduct yourself, the kinds of things you say ought to say to the people who look at you and who hear you that I belong to the Lord. The influence that we have on this world, it should demonstrate the power of God at work in our lives. Three things I believe this text would suggest about being a salty Christian. First of all, salty Christians are those who influence the world. The influence that Jesus sprayed on this world demonstrated that God the Father was in complete control of every area and aspect of life. Every miracle that Jesus performed established God's supremacy over forces and systems that thought they had the last word regarding the human predicament. Every time Jesus healed the sick, he demonstrated that sickness and disease does not control the body, because God has the power to comfort, deliver, and set free. Every time Jesus rebuked the demon, he demonstrated that we don't have to live in fear of either the known or unknown evil, because there's no power in hell, on earth, or in the sky that can keep one of God's children down. Every time Jesus calmed the storm, every time he multiplied a piece of bread, every time he walked on a wave of water, he demonstrated that he was in control and not nature. The influence that Jesus had upon this world was the kind that demonstrated the power and presence of God in this world. This message is one of challenge to the church today, because I believe that if we want to see a better city, if we want better communities, if we want to have a better home, better children, a better school system, then we must begin spraying on this world the kind of influence that demonstrates the power of God at work in the world. And I've come to suggest to us today that wherever we see suffering humanity, it's not time to call on the government. It's time for the church to be the church. Whenever we see people suffering, it's not time to call the Red Cross. When we see people in trouble, it's not time to call on government. It's time for the church to be the church. Just look at what's going on right here in our own community. Escalating teen pregnancy, rapidly increasing incarceration of our young men, an out of control drug epidemic, violent crimes of every kind, domestic violence, pornography, child molestation, homosexuality, bisexuality, transsexuality, lesbianism, incest, AIDS and disease, unrighteousness, wickedness, covetousness, malice, envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, backbiters, haters of God, inventors of evil things, disobedience to parents. It all rather paints a graphic picture of our present condition. Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth. And if the salt has no influence in this world, then it is good for nothing. And what he literally says to us as Christians, if we're not trying to influence somebody's life for the good, then our lives are literally good for nothing. We ought to be cast out and trodden under the foot of men. Everywhere you go, you ought to influence somebody for good. When you encounter people, you ought to leave them better than they were when you found them. You ought to influence them in such a way that it becomes their desire to want to meet Jesus and get closer to him. I wonder sometimes with all of the preachers as they are, with as many Sunday school teachers as they are, with as many deacons and choir members and church programs going on in our churches almost on a daily basis, why has the quality of life dropped so low? Jesus says you are the influence in the world, and if you lose your influence, how will the world be saved? Could it be that our inability to influence the world is because we look too much like the world? It seems as though everything that comes up in the world finds its way in the church. There used to be a time when there was a distinguishable difference between going to places in the world and going to church. It used to be that when you went to church, you knew you were at church, and when you went somewhere else, you knew you were somewhere else. But now we have allowed so much stuff to get into the church until it's hard to determine sometimes whether we are at church or whether we're at Joe's place. I mean, there ought to be a distinguishable difference in the conduct and behavior of those in the church over against those in the world. I suggest to you today that the world has its own language, and we have our own language. We have our own songs. We have our own music, and it ought to demonstrate the power of God at work in us. We cannot change the world if we look like the world. We cannot help the world if we are too much a part of the world. We are called out of the world to go back into the world, to bring them who are in darkness out of the world into the church, which represents the marvelous light of God. I ask you this morning, how well are you influencing right where you are? How well are you influencing people in your own home? How many of us leave folk in the bed on our way to church? How many times do we pass up people on the street corner on our way to church? We're just like that deacon and that Levite in the story of the Good Samaritan. They were so in a hurry to get to the temple to carry out their temple duties that they passed up fallen humanity on the wayside. Jesus says, we are the salt of the earth. And if we lose our effectiveness, if we lose our influence, we're good for nothing. Salty Christians are those who first influence the world. Secondly, salty Christians are those who purify those around them. One of the characteristics of salt is that salt purifies. Salty Christians are first themselves pure in heart, thus becoming God's means of purifying the rest of the world. We can purify the world by exemplifying the divine standards of righteousness in our thoughts, our speech, our actions, and by remaining untainted by the world. You are the salt of the earth. You are called to be unique. Not better, but unique by making a difference in those around us. Could it be that another reason why our influence is retarded is because much of our time and effort is dedicated to church work, and not enough is dedicated to the work of the church?
Well,
and there is a difference in church work and the work of the church. And incidentally, the things that we often fall out about in the church are things that are representative of church work and not the work of the church. I mean, we fuss and argue about who's in charge.